I don't like to be in those shoes because it's so sad for me. I hope hopefully this stops.
Community mourns tonight right now on KION News at 11. Friends and family in mourning after yesterday's mass shooting in San Jose. Tonight we were there at the vigil honoring the victims. In California, unveiling the nation's biggest vaccine jackpot, how much you could win in cash prizes just for having been vaccinated.
Plus a drought update and a look at that Memorial Day weekend forecast.
And a groundbreaking ceremony at Fort Hunter Liggett, the new microgrid that will help save energy throughout the camp.
This is KION News Channel 546 at 11.
Good evening. Our top story tonight, they were all essential workers. Throughout the pandemic, they made sure that people who needed to get to work had a way to do so. But for these 9 VTA workers, their shifts doing just that, ending tragically. The victims ranging in age from 29 to 63 years old. As the shock of yesterday's shooting now sinks in, it leaves behind deep sadness for those in the entire San Jose community. Thanks for joining us tonight for KION News at 11. I'm Veronica Macias. KION's Josh Cristianto live for us tonight in San Jose, where he spoke to a lot of people attending tonight's vigil. And Josh, from what we saw earlier, there was a big turnout, people paying their respects.
Well, that's right, Veronica. The crowd have since dispersed, but you can see behind me the makeshift memorial that is still left behind here at the San Jose City Hall. The flowers and the candles are a reminder that there's still a community that cares about the 9 victims and their families.
The people gathered on the steps, atop the railings, and above the traffic lights to remember the ones who lost their lives so suddenly and so senselessly.
I get sad. I don't know. I can't believe it. This happened.
Complete strangers laying down flowers and lighting candles for the 9 victims who lost their lives at a VTA facility on Wednesday. Hundreds more gathered together to hear their names read aloud and to show that the families are not alone. There's a community behind them.
I felt like it was the least I could do. I don't drive, so I take VTA all the time to get to my work. I think the drivers do an awesome job. They're very, very helpful. They're really valued members of the community.
I've seen some other community members, like I saw my old pastor from Santa Cruz, and just people coming here to show solidarity for the community, especially in times like this. It's great to see.
First responders also showed up to pay their respects. Even VTA bus drivers drove by and honked in support for their fallen co-workers. Relatives, friends, and strangers all coming together as one family. And out of those I spoke with, one thing became clear: sites like these have become all too common.
I hate to say this, but I actually kind of expected that one day there would be a mass shooting in my city, because we have seen that happen so many times, so often in America, that it didn't shock me that much, to be honest.
This is there be change, you know. There be change because for everybody, be safe. We like to be safe again, like the years before.
And Veronica, just like after the Gilroy Garlic Festival shooting just 2 years ago, phrases like San Jose Strong and VTA Strong are coming up, just a sign that resilience is contagious in every community. Reporting live in San Jose, Josh Cristianto, KION News Channel 546.
Nice to see that big turnout. Thank you, Josh. And tonight we're learning that the 9th victim, 49-year-old Alex Fritsch, was taken to a local hospital, but he later died as a result of his injuries. His wife now describing the last moment that she spent by her husband's side before he passed away.
Alex was really fighting hard. He didn't want to go anywhere, and I didn't want him to go. He grabbed my hand, and the nurse came in because he was deteriorating. And she said, "He knows you're here." He's crying. And he took his last breath and his heart stopped.
And his oldest daughter was able to arrive. She came from San Jose, said her final goodbyes along with his parents who lived close by in San Juan Bautista and Ben Lomond. And tonight we're also learning another victim, 49-year-old Tim Romo. He was a Greenfield native. His former teacher, Art Salvango, was a longtime family friend and says he was at home watching on the news when he heard Tim's name included among the dead.
That's how we found out. So then we called Linda, his cousin, and she verified that he was the one that was, he was killed.
Salvango says his biggest concern now is for Romo's parents and worries what they must be going through as they try to cope with the loss of their son, and adds that Tim's passing is devastating for the entire Greenfield community.
Tim was a native son, born and raised in Greenfield, married with kids and grandkids.
Greenfield Mayor Lance Walker spoke on behalf of the city and says Romo's parents were a staple in the community. Tim's father, Mike, served as police chief and mayor for the city for years, and Tim's mother worked for the school district. He hopes the city of Greenfield will eventually be able to organize something locally to honor Tim's life. And tonight, also learning more about the arsenal of weapons that the suspect brought to work early yesterday morning. It's becoming clear that he snapped and intended to settle scores and brought the firepower to do it.
Surveillance video from the VTA light rail yard shows 57-year-old Sam Cassidy casually walking between the two buildings where he gunned down 9 of his co-workers Wednesday morning.
Right now, we think he fired about 39 rounds.
Santa Clara County Sheriff Lori Smith says Cassidy picked out his victims, who would live and who would die.
One person, he said, "I'm not going to shoot you," and then started shooting others.
Investigators donned protective gear to search Cassidy's San Jose home, which had partially collapsed after Cassidy set it on fire yesterday. A federal official confirms to CBS News that Cassidy was detained by Customs and Border Patrol in 2016 after he entered the country from the Philippines because he had writings about terrorism and hating his workplace.
I'm shocked. I am very confused.
The suspect's ex-wife says Cassidy had a temper and talked about killing co-workers a decade ago.
That was one of our biggest problems. He was very quiet, kept things to himself.
A neighbor's doorbell camera caught Cassidy on tape as he loaded his pickup before heading to work yesterday morning. The sheriff says he was armed with 3 semi-automatic handguns and 32 12-round magazines.
From the time that we first got a shots fired call to 6 minutes, they were approaching the floor where the suspect was.
Smith praised deputies and police officers for entering the building where shots were still being fired and said they prevented further bloodshed.
One of our contact teams was able to find the suspect, and when they opened the door and the suspect saw the sheriff's office, he took his own life.
And tonight, the Santa Clara County Sheriff says that VTA employees, local law enforcement, and fire and emergency crews had recently just trained in an active shooter drill at the rail yard, adding that her deputies tell her their training immediately kicked in, and she's positive that saved lives. Covering Salinas now, last year the pandemic forcing many graduations to be held in a drive-through style, but now high school seniors are getting the opportunity to celebrate their graduation in person and with their family and family members. Friends and family members, graduating seniors and visitors had to wear a mask throughout the entire ceremony, and several high schools held multiple sessions in order to have all the graduates and their friends and family there remain socially distant. One student says it was difficult having to start the senior year through the computer screen virtually, but she's happy they were able to end in person.
Honestly, I'm just so grateful and blessed to even be physically standing here, especially with everything we've been through this past year. It's a great sign of resiliency from us and our school.
Many of those seniors telling KION they look forward to their next academic chapter, going to college, and we wish them the best of luck. Congratulations. Taking a first look at weather tonight, Weather Authority Chief Meteorologist Nancy Anga. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Veronica. It is Drought Update Thursday, and let's take a look at what's going on across the state. We saw a further reduction in droughts, or not reduction, I suppose, further increase in drought status across the region this week. And the entire state's still in moderate or worse drought. 95% now in severe drought. That's up 1 percentage point from last week. 74% now in extreme drought, up 1 percentage point from last week. And 26% of the state now in exceptional drought, up 10 percentage points from last week. So that was the big change. Now, unfortunately, the graphics are not coming in for this week's, but I have added the changes that have occurred in the past week, and that includes an addition of the Sacramento Valley here to this exceptional or worst drought category. So basically all the way from Redding down to Lodi. And we also saw an increase in drought status in the Tahoe area and also up along the North Coast. These areas increased about 1 status point. So again, we saw some worsening of the drought this week across the state, but not locally. It was really the same. We're still in severe drought around the bay and points northward, or I should say extreme drought around the bay and points northward, and severe drought farther south than that. And the reason that southern Monterey and San Benito counties are only severe drought, and I say only severe, is because we sat under that atmospheric river for 3 days in this area in late January, which seems like it was the only time that it rained this year. But it's not going to rain again, probably for the rest of the summer and into the fall before our next chances of precipitation. If we ever do get any precip in the summer, it's usually from tropical systems, so we watch that. There actually is one area that's being monitored for tropical cyclone development right here, but this time of year it's really hard to get those anywhere near the west coast, so no rain in sight at the moment. We're going to take a look at that Memorial Day forecast because it's going to be a scorcher in some areas. That's coming up in a bit.
All right, thank you, Dan. Still ahead, how you could win some cash prizes just by having been vaccinated. We explain how this works under the new vaccination incentive program for the state of California. But first, another big choice on the way for California voters. In tonight's special report, KION's Aaron Groff dives into what you need to know before the upcoming governor recall election.
This has been a very hard ride for every person of color.
Right now on KION News at 11, emotions were high today as a jury finds former officer Derek Chauvin guilty of murder. We have local reaction tonight and hear from those in Minneapolis. And another reason here to get vaccinated, the latest conditions that are set by the state to increase indoor capacity for restaurants and other venues.
Cloudy skies across the Central Coast tonight and even some drizzle. I'll let you know what to expect.
And new recommendations for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine after being placed on hold last week after reported blood clots in some patients.
This is KION News Channel 546 at 11.
Good evening. Our top story tonight, people gathering around a now growing memorial for George Floyd. This was in front of Cup Foods in Minneapolis, outside that store where nearly a year ago now, Floyd was killed at the knee of a police officer. Many people had strong reactions and had protests after video of Floyd's arrest and death. But tonight, a very different scene in response to Derek Chauvin being taken away in handcuffs. This was reaction from around the country today as demonstrators march peacefully this evening, knowing that Chauvin is being held accountable for his actions. Thanks for joining us tonight here on KION News at 11. I'm Veronica Macias. It's the verdict that many across the country and the world had been hoping for after about 10 hours of deliberating. A jury found Derek Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts. And tonight we have team coverage for you. KION's Stephanie Aceves was in Seaside today speaking with local community activists about their reactions, including speaking to a man who lost his own father in an officer-involved shooting. But first, we turn things over to Michael George in Minneapolis with details from inside that courtroom today.
For weeks now, Minneapolis has been preparing for the possibility of violence. Instead, tonight, there's relief. Many tell us that the wounds that this community suffered after George Floyd's death 11 months ago began to heal tonight.
Find the defendant guilty.
Derek Chauvin appeared to remain Motionless as the judge in his murder trial read one guilty verdict after another.
Find the defendant guilty.
The jury convicted the fired Minneapolis police officer on all 3 charges: second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. Jurors deliberated about 10 hours over 2 days after 3 weeks of testimony from 45 witnesses. Crowds erupted in cheers outside the courthouse.
Thank God for Minnesota for the truth.
And at the spot where Floyd died last Memorial Day, when his neck was pinned under Chauvin's knee for more than 9 minutes.
This has been a very hard ride for every person of color.
The disturbing images sparked nationwide outrage, sometimes violent protests, and a national reckoning on racial justice.
I would not call today's verdict justice, however, but it is accountability.
During closing arguments, prosecutors asked jurors to believe their eyes after seeing the video played again and again in court. The defense argued other factors, such as drugs and health issues, contributed to the 46-year-old's death. More than 3,000 National Guard members stood watch here in Minneapolis as the nation anxiously awaited the verdict. President Biden calls the verdict a step forward.
No one should be above the law, and today's verdict sends that message. But it's not enough. We can't stop here.
Floyd's brother expressed relief, but said the search for justice isn't over.
We have to protest because it seems like this is a never-ending cycle.
Chauvin's bail was revoked, and he was taken out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The judge is expected to sentence Chauvin in about 8 weeks. And the 3 other officers who were with Derek Chauvin that day are also set to face trial for aiding and abetting murder this summer. In Minneapolis, Michael George, back to you.
It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see. The systemic racism.
Black Americans, and black men in particular, have been treated throughout the course of our history as less than human.
Earlier today, the president and vice president there calling the verdict a measure of justice. Biden has grown very close to the Floyd family. He called them this afternoon, he says, and he says they then challenged him to do more, pushing to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which has already passed in the House. However, it's now stalled in the Senate. And the Santa Cruz Police Department releasing a statement in response to today's verdict, saying in part, as a unified Santa Cruz, we must strive not to allow legitimate anger and frustration to spiral into violence or allow others with divisive motives to hijack community emotions for destructive purposes. They go on to say, as CPD strives to ensure the rights and liberties of all our community members are protected while providing a high level of safety for all our residents, businesses, and visitors, end quote.
Say his name.
George Floyd.
Say his name.
George Floyd.
That's how I feel. I'm excited. I'm a little in shock, in awe.
Today's verdict in Minneapolis also spurred hope for many across the country, including community advocates here in the Central Coast. Community leaders in Seaside say that they believe today's conviction is one step forward in repairing injustices for families of color who have experienced racial inequality. KION's Stephanie Aceves has more reaction from one man who lost his father in an officer-involved shooting.
I spoke with community members and activists who expressed relief at Derek Chauvin being found guilty on all charges. Alade Jehudi Mas, whose father was shot dead in an officer-involved shooting by Seaside Police, says he's glad the Floyd family got justice. But he wants to remind others that shootings like this happen in our own backyards.
I am a George Floyd. I am a Dante Wright, and I do not want to be another hashtag. I am excited for today, but we have more work to do tomorrow.
Excitement, shock, and awe. These are the feelings that community activist Nathaniel Sawyer says he felt upon hearing the guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin. Sawyer brought along activists from all walks of life to express the need for solidarity in these pressing times because for him, injustice not only affects George Floyd, but affects everyone.
We, as in the black and brown community, the Asian community, even the white community now, have been saying we need justice, we need change. And Derek Chauvin's trial is an example of that change that we are desperately crying for.
For Seaside's police chief, Abdul Pridgen, he says that accountability was necessary and is one step towards bridging a gap between police and the community.
It's also necessary for us to continue to build trust in communities where there's an absence of trust. And I think this will go a step further in that direction.
As someone who has had the first-hand experience of having a loved one die at the hands of police, Jehudi Mas knows the pain and grief that continues after shootings like this, but feels that this guilty verdict alone will not solve police brutality.
It's really important for accountability, and I think for America to understand that we are headed in the right direction, but this one case in itself is not going to be the death blow to the problems we have.
The NAACP in Santa Cruz is planning to have a commemoration event for George Floyd in late May. In Seaside, Stephanie Aceves, KION News Channel 546.
And the NAACP Santa Cruz County branch also releasing a statement tonight, reading in part, quote, "The arc of the moral universe bent a little closer to justice today, but there is still a long way to go. A badge is never a shield for accountability." It goes on to say the NAACP will not rest and is well positioned to continue our efforts to ensure the deaths of George Floyd, Dante Wright, Breonna Taylor, and Sandra Bland, and countless others are not in vain, but move us toward a true, unadulterated justice for our community.
This is KION News Channel 546 at 11.
Good evening. Our top story tonight, the biggest day reopening for California after this year of a pandemic, as the entire Central Coast now out of the most restrictive purple tier. Thanks for being here at 11. I'm Veronica Macias. Tomorrow, Monterey County is expected to move into the red tier. So let's see what's going to be reopening for us on the Central Coast. Places like museums, zoos, and even movie theaters can reopen. Movie theaters in Monterey County like Maya Cinemas and Cinemark Monterey are planning to open this Friday. KION's Stephanie Aceves was in Monterey tonight with how people are feeling about returning to our normal social lives. Are we ready?
With Monterey County announcing moving to the red tier, some semblance of normalcy is finally returning to the Central Coast. This is after a year of battling the pandemic, and some residents here are glad to finally be able to sit down with their favorite bowl of popcorn and enjoy a movie. Monterey County is moving to the red tier on Wednesday. Ironically, doors to movie theaters will reopen on the anniversary of their 2020 closure. This means movie theaters can open indoors with a capacity of 25% or 100 people, whichever is fewer. Theaters like Maya Cinemas in Salinas and Cinemark Monterey in the Del Monte Shopping Center are set to open on Friday.
This is going to be the first time. Our management team is really excited, of course, after a year to reopen the doors again.
Maya Cinemas will open, but with precautions set by CDC guidelines, including wearing masks, social distancing with hand sanitizing stations, and a reserved seating system that ensures people are socially distanced inside the theater.
If you are going with your, let's say, with your friend, and you're going to buy 2 tickets, they're going to select those 2 tickets, and then the following family, let's say a family of 6, they're gonna buy 6 tickets, and they're gonna be apart inside of the theater.
Gloria Greenstein moved to Monterey a month before the pandemic began and hasn't been able to see a movie here, but is excited to finally step foot inside.
It would just be fun to be in a movie theater and maybe even talk to the strangers next to you, even though that'd probably bother them.
The CEO of Maya Cinemas expects a huge turnout, with it being a year since the theater has opened. Reporting in Monterey, Stephanie Aceves, KION News Channel 546.
Maybe saying hi to those strangers at a distance. All right, one of the biggest questions for a lot of people: when the Monterey Bay Aquarium is going to open. The aquarium has released a statement about their plans for reopening as Monterey County moves into the red tier, saying in part this is a huge step forward for the recovery of our community. We're not out of the woods yet, and we acknowledge our debt of gratitude to frontline healthcare workers and other essential workers for their dedication and hard work during the past year of the pandemic, end quote. The executive director, Julie Packard, adds that there is still a lot to do before the aquarium can be up and running again. They will announce more details in the next few weeks, but will welcome first members and donors with general admission following later in May. Today, Governor Gavin Newsom touted the progress toward reopening campuses closed for the past year by the coronavirus pandemic.
80%. Was wonderful to see. 80% of the children at this school are back in. We're not forcing anybody, but those that choose, 80% chose to come back in. I imagine you'll see that number even grow once people have some confidence.
But as excited as kids and parents were to return to school this week, many families questioning the new hybrid model. While each reopening plan is different, some schools are only opening 2 days a week for only 2 hours each day, while the remainder of the week is solely distance learning for students. And that's what the new learning model is like for Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, leading some parents to say it's simply not enough and doesn't help parents at all. Working parents under MPUSD's new reopening plan, elementary school will begin hybrid learning. That's on April 8th. The district will then phase in higher grade levels in the following weeks, April 12th for 6th, 9th, and 10th grades, and April 19th for 7th, 8th, 11th, and 12th grades for students. Those students will be then split into 2 groups. Group A will go to school Monday and Tuesday afternoon. Then Group B will go to school Thursday and Friday. But parents express concerns about learning loss and psychological challenges if distance learning continues for students.
There's no replacement for actually being in the classroom with teachers, with other kids, just having that whole experience right now. I feel like our kids are going to be a year behind all the other kids that have been back to school.
MPUSD superintendent tells KION they wanted to balance in-person learners and distance learners, and that social distancing guidelines are keeping them from bringing back students full-time right now. However, the district expects to be back in person 5 days a week come this fall.
It's happy, that's it. On 3.
Cameras flashing there over at North Salinas High School as seniors were back on campus to take those cap and gown photos. Some students from Everett Alvarez High arriving for some makeup photos. Already, the state has released new updated guidelines for commencement ceremonies, allowing for outdoor events with specific restrictions for each tier taking effect April 1st. We reached out to Salinas Union High School District, one of the largest districts here on the Central Coast, about how they're going to move forward with commencement ceremonies. However, they tell us more planning must be done before they can make any announcement on changes for graduation. Governor Gavin Newsom also announced that more vaccines are on the way to California in the next few weeks. So far, more than 20% of the population has received at least 1 dose of the vaccine, and more than 10% of California residents have been fully vaccinated.
12.6 million vaccines have been administered in the state of California. That's more than all but 6 nations globally. In the last 24 hours, we administered 464,000 doses. That's the most of any state ever. It's the most we've ever administered.
Newsom also adds that California has 1.8% positivity rate, which is the 4th lowest positivity rate in the entire U.S. And millions more people now eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. There is concern, though, that people are falsely claiming to have severe medical conditions to jump the line. Doctors are currently relying on the honor system since verification is not required by the state. Dr. David Ghilarducci, the Santa Cruz County Deputy Health Officer, explains that verification of medical conditions for so many people is difficult because in the field with drive-through clinics, they can't verify. He adds that he's counting on people to be responsible and honest about their eligibility.
It does create some, issues for people who may claim to have a condition they don't have. But if they jump in line, that means that could be harming somebody else.
Dr. Ghilarducci says the large increase in people now eligible is going to use up much of the current vaccine supply, but from the national to the local level, doses are expected to increase significantly over the next 6 weeks. Across the nation tonight, the first young children got vaccinated in a new trial here in the U.S. And tonight, more states are even expanding their vaccinations, leading to more reopenings. Jonathan Vigliotti reports.
Tonight, Moderna becoming the first U.S. drug maker to vaccinate children, testing the shot on babies as young as 6 months up to kids under 12. The company also running a trial in kids over 12. 2 of the participants are Dylan and Blair Davis. Their parents, both doctors.
I wanted them to be an example, to set an example, to say, hey, this vaccine is safe.
Promising news for kids and parents.
So we would expect that children going into high school in the fall will be able to go in vaccinated.
And a Florida baby has been born with COVID antibodies. It's the first known case. The mother, a healthcare worker who received her initial dose of the Moderna vaccine while pregnant. Tonight, Mississippi is expanding vaccinations to all adult residents 16 and older. Connecticut and Michigan announcing they'll do the same on April 5th. Thanks in part to vaccinations, California is beginning to experience normal life again.
Really fun and nice, because we haven't been here in like a year.
But this comes as San Bernardino reports a case of the worrisome P1 variant initially detected in Brazil, the first case in California. It's already in at least 11 other states.
How concerned should we be when we hear about these variants taking root here in America?
Well, I think the reality is no one knows. The fact is cases are declining despite variants being present. What the average American should be doing is focusing on getting vaccinated.
And tonight, COVID creating March Madness at the NCAA. 6 referees sent home from the men's tournament after one positive test and contact tracing. Jonathan Vigliotti, CBS News, Rancho Cucamonga, California.
Cautiously optimistic. Weather Authority Chief Meteorologist Dan Cianca. Dan, we're taking the pastel colors out already, getting ready.
It is that time of year, the Easter Bunny, all that stuff. But before that even happens, we've got St. Patrick's Day tomorrow.
We're green.
Oh, yeah, and I've got the corned beef in the fridge. Okay, we've got some potatoes, some onions, and a big old head of a local cabbage. Can't wait to steam that up tomorrow morning and make all my neighbors think like, what is smelling? Steamed cabbage going on over here. Take a look at the sunset. We did eke out a little bit of color as the sun was setting out. That's the view from the south side of Salinas at around 7:15 tonight. Temperature still cool for this time of year, though. We should be, all of us, in the 60s to around 70 degrees on any given March day, but only a couple spots even reached the 60s today. Bradley was the warmest at 62. Most of us in the upper 50s. Salinas and Santa Cruz, for example. Watsonville, Monterey, you didn't get out of the mid-50s. In Bonnie Doon, you didn't get out of the 40s, so it's feeling pretty chilly out there. Out there tonight, temperature's a little cooler than this time last night for a couple spots, but most of us a little warmer. The overall air mass is warmer. The spots that are cooler had more cloud cover last night than they do tonight, and right now we are currently sitting in the 40s for most cities around the bay and inland as well. We're down to 38 already at the Pinnacles and at Boulder Creek, and we do have a few clouds out there. They're fairly limited to the northern slopes of the Santa Lucias, but the clouds will be on the increase ahead of a weather system. It will bring rain to the region. We're going to talk about whether that's going to spoil your St. Patty's Day and coming in just a bit.
Sounds good, Dan. Thank you.
You bet.
Still ahead, the recall deadline now approaching as organizers collect last-minute signatures to replace Governor Gavin Newsom. Tonight, how Newsom launches a big campaign to push back. Plus, a deadly explosion in a California neighborhood. What investigators are saying about that blaze in Ontario.